Okay, so good morning. Welcome back to the Lamrim class, going through the middle length Lamrim by Lama Tsongkhapa. So we'll start with prayers and then do a meditation on the next step in the sevenfold cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta that we studied.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme science, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flower-strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Okay, so take a few moments to make sure you're settled down in the present, the here and now. And make sure as well that your mind is in the best state possible, having as your reason for being here bodhicitta, the wish to help all sentient beings and to actualize your Buddha nature, your potential for enlightenment, so that you can be of the greatest possible benefit to all living beings. So today we'll do a meditation on love, also known as loving kindness, Maitri, Metta, Jamba. So the first 4 steps of the sevenfold cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta are said to engender a kind of love that's called heartwarming love or endearing love, affectionate love. This is the kind of love a parent, like a mother or father, has towards their little child. So bring to mind either your mother or someone else who has shown you a great deal of kindness and care, especially when you were vulnerable and in great need of such care. And as you think of this person, see if you can feel this kind of love, seeing that person as dear, precious, beautiful, and you really want to return the kindness that they have shown to you. And so the next step in the sevenfold method is meditating on love. this wish for others to have happiness and its causes, and expand this feeling of love and gradually learn to extend it to more and more people and sentient beings. So we can start with this person that you've just thought about, your mother or whoever was so kind to you. And so good to have a mental picture of this person, and then focusing on that, contemplate how wonderful it would be if they could have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I will make sure that they have happiness and its causes. And now bring to mind another person who is a friend, either a friend or a relative, someone you already care about, and have a mental picture of that person. And then do the same contemplation. Feel how wonderful it would be if this person could have happiness and its causes. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will do what I can to make sure that they do have happiness and its causes. Then let's try it with a neutral person. So you could just imagine a stranger or someone you might know a little bit but you're not really close to. Imagine that person in front of you. And then think how wonderful it would be if this person could have happiness and its causes. May they have happiness and its causes. And I will do what I can to make sure they have happiness and its causes. And then think of someone you dislike or find annoying, not your worst enemy, but maybe someone you have a mild level of dislike for, and picture that person in front of you. And then do the same contemplation. And how wonderful it would be if this person could have happiness and the causes of happiness. And it might be helpful to think that if they were more happy, they might be more likable. They wouldn't be so annoying. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will do what I can to make sure they have happiness and its causes. So one sutra, the King of Concentrations Sutra, says that the merit of generating love is greater than the merit of constantly making incredibly vast offerings to the most excellent beings like the Buddhas. Even just spending a few minutes trying to generate love is incredibly powerful, beneficial, meritorious. So make the determination to work on doing this, generating love and having it there in your mind, in your life as much as you can. And it doesn't matter if you really feel it or not. Sometimes the feeling might not be there, but it's good to do it anyway. It's good to just try to generate these thoughts and say the words to yourself. And that itself is meditating on love. And if you keep doing that, keep working on that, then the feeling will start to be there more often and more genuine. So don't get discouraged if, the feeling doesn't come up right away. Okay, so we're on page 213. So now we're going through the second main method for developing bodhicitta, which is equalizing and exchanging oneself and others. So we have just one more point to go through in this book, and then I'll bring in some other information about this. Yeah, so this last point is the actual way to meditate, and I just tried to summarize the main points that Lama Tsongkhapa makes on this slide. So he says, by the power of attachment to the self, this self-cherishing has produced much that is undesirable from beginningless time up to now. Despite the fact that you have wanted to create excellence for yourself, you have relied on unsuitable means, contemplating your own welfare as paramount. Owing to this, neither your own welfare nor that of others has been accomplished despite the passing of countless eons. So that's pretty powerful, right? Beginningless time, like, we can't even put a number on how long we've been existing in samsara, and we've been constantly trying to get happiness for ourselves with this self-centered attitude. Maybe we got a little bit of sort of poor quality happiness, samsaric happiness. It doesn't last very long and isn't very satisfying. But other than that, we haven't achieved real, genuine, long-term happiness, much less the happiness of others. Okay, so all this time and energy we've been putting into trying to get happiness hasn't borne fruit. Then he says, not only have you failed to accomplish that, you have only been tormented by suffering. So all the different kinds of sufferings, suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and then pervasive suffering, always having pervasive suffering. If you had shifted the concern for your own welfare to that of others, you would have become a Buddha a long time ago. And both your own and others' welfare would have become excellent without a doubt. So just imagine, we could have become a Buddha long ago, many lifetimes ago, if we had just decided to make that switch and stop cherishing ourselves, stop being self-centered, selfish. But since you did not do that, the time has been spent in meaningless exertion. So that's pretty powerful. And then he says, think, now that I have understood this, I will rely on the mindfulness and vigilance that this self-cherishing is my worst enemy, and make much effort so that the self-cherishing that has not arisen does not arise, and that which has arisen does not last long. So that's the first point. So seeing that self-cherishing, that state of mind that we have within us is our number one enemy, and use mindfulness and vigilance or introspective awareness to watch our mind and try not to let self-cherishing, self-centeredness come up. And even if it does, which it probably will for a while, don't let it linger and don't let it hang around. Just like in the summertime when it's really, really hot and dry and we see a tiny little flame or tiny little spark, we don't let it be, right? We make sure that we stamp it out, get rid of it as quickly as we can. So self-cherishing is even worse than fires. Hard to believe, but yeah, it is the thing that's kept us stuck in samsara and hasn't allowed us to get out and get to enlightenment, and is the cause of so much suffering. Having made this certainty firm, familiarize yourself with it many times. So don't just, have that idea once or twice, but again and again and again. Really make that very firm in your mind. Okay, so that's like stamping out the self-centered attitude. And then he says, by thinking about the benefits of cherishing others again and again, in this way, he will generate strong enthusiasm to do so from the depths of your heart. So we need to really contemplate how the opposite attitude, instead of self-cherishing or self-centeredness, focusing on others, cherishing them, being altruistic, loving, compassionate, and so on towards others, placing their needs first, So getting really convinced of the benefits of that attitude, that state of mind, then that will help us generate enthusiasm for cultivating that state of mind. He says, then you will not generate new mental states that are neglectful of others, and any that have arisen will not last long. So the more you get familiar with that state of mind, or that understanding of the benefits of cherishing others, then it's less likely that that neglectful attitudes towards others, not caring about others, will arise. And even if they arise, they won't last long. By giving rise, to whatever degree you can, to the thought that others are dear, pleasant, and likable, generate the mind cherishing others just as you previously cherished yourself. So that's kind of the meaning of exchanging self with others. The attitude we used to have with regard to ourselves, oh, I'm so important, I'm so wonderful, my happiness is number one priority. That attitude we had about ourselves, we're learning to have that attitude towards others. See them as dear and precious, and their happiness is of utmost importance. And then the neglect, the way it's normally explained, the neglectful attitude we used to have towards others, we cultivate that towards ourselves. Although, like I mentioned last week, the Dalai Lama says that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for our own happiness, but just not make that our number one priority as in the past. And then there's some quotes from Atisha and some of the Kadampa masters. Atisha said, "The Tibetans celebrate bodhisattvas who do not know how to train in love and compassion." He was then asked, "Well then, how do you do that?" And he replied, "You must train sequentially from the beginning." This is a little cryptic, but I guess he's saying that when he got to Tibet and he heard people talking about this bodhisattva and that bodhisattva, but when he looked at those so-called bodhisattvas, he seemed to think they didn't really have love and compassion. So yeah, it's easy to just talk about these words, and talk about, yes, I want to become enlightened, to help all sentient beings, but not really have those attitudes in your mind. So it seems like he observed that when he got to Tibet, and so he made that kind of comment, and that it's necessary to train sequentially, starting with the beginning meditations. And then this next one is really cryptic. So Langri Tangpa, who's the author of the 8 verses, said, "Shawopa and I have 18 human methods and 1 horse method, 19 altogether." So I looked at a few commentaries, and they say, yeah, it's not really clear what these 18 human methods are, but there's no list of them anywhere. But the human methods refer to, in the Lamrim Chenmo, it says the human methods refer to methods for sustaining friends, for keeping good relationships with people. And the horse method apparently is a method for overcoming enemies. And the enemy is not out there, but our self-centered attitudes. So that's what they mean by the horse method. The human methods are to generate the mind set on supreme enlightenment and train in doing whatever one does for the welfare of sentient beings. As for the horse method, since it is our self-cherishing that prevents any bodhicitta that has been born from surviving, we adopt a sideways stance, like a warrior, I don't know, and then confront it and train in whatever we can to harm it. With sentient beings, we cherish them and train in whatever we can to help them. Okay, so when it comes to other sentient beings, we do as much as we can to benefit them and also train our mind in love and compassion and bodhicitta. Then when it comes to the self-centered attitude, we confront that and overcome it. Kamlungpa said, since we act deviously toward precious sentient beings, they will also do the same to us. So, yeah, the way we treat others will affect the way they treat us, right? So if we are devious or nasty, unkind, hostile, and so on, using others for our own needs, then they're going to see us behaving that way and think, well, okay, that's the way you want to be. I'm going to be that way too. So then, yeah, we'll get that kind of treatment from others. On the other hand, if you really sincerely cherish others and you have love, kindness, compassion, do as much as you can to be helpful to them, treat them well, treat them, as they want to be treated, then that will not all the time, maybe, but much of the time, then they will respond that way to you. You'll get treated that way by them. You'll be regarded as precious. A lot of people will come to your funeral, and even before that, people will be there to help you when you need help. Not like the hostile person who nobody comes to their funeral, and people are glad when they die. We don't want to be like that. Okay, it is good if a habit develops that constantly checks to what extent this mind has been generated, because everything stems from it. Whether the root of the Mahayana has been planted, and whether one is included among Mahayanists. Okay, so if it does not arise, do not leave it at that, but rely on a virtuous friend who teaches it. So we need to really check our mind and check, am I developing more compassion and kindness and cherishing of others, more altruism? Is that growing? And if it's not, go back to your teacher. Find teachers that can help you to do that. Always keep company with a companion that is mind training. Okay, so mind training. There's lots and lots of teachings about that. So learn mind training techniques and make those practices your friend, your companion. Read the scriptures of the teacher and their commentaries, especially in Mahayana scriptures, so that they talk about the bodhisattva state of mind, the bodhisattva way of life. As its cause, accumulate the collections and purify your obstructions. So we also need to complement our development of these states of mind with merit. We need lots of merit to build up. I like to think of merit as fuel for your car. If you have a car and an engine but no fuel, you're not going to go anywhere. So merit is like fuel, so that the activities we do, our practices, will actually enable us to go towards enlightenment. And then purify, do purification to clear away the negative energy. Since it is certain that if you train your mind in this way, the seed will be fully planted, these actions are of no little importance and a reason for joy. It is, as Atisha said in his concise method for accomplishing the Mahayana path, for those who wish to enter the gate of Mahayana Dharma, it's worth an eon of effort for bodhicitta to grow, which, like the sun and moon, eliminates darkness and pacifies scorching heat. Well, I think the sun eliminates darkness, and they talk about the moon being cooling, pacifies heat. I don't know if that's really true, but anyway, when the sun is down and the moon is out, it definitely feels cooler. Okay, then last point is the measure of it being bodhicitta, having arisen. This should be understood from what was already explained above. So I think he's referring to at the conclusion of the sevenfold mind, the sevenfold method, back on page 208, the defining characteristics of bodhicitta. So we keep working on these methods until bodhicitta has arisen, and not just once or twice in a contrived way, but in a natural, spontaneous, and uncontrived way. So the section here is short, less than 2 pages. And in the Lamrim Chenmo, this corresponding section is a bit longer, and it includes more quotations from Shantideva, but also from Nagarjuna's text, Commentary on Bodhicitta, which is it Yangten Rinpoche gave teachings. When was that? Some months ago. June? Okay, thank you. Yeah, it was a fast. A lot of energy. So in that text, he has some verses talking about how all happiness and good results arise from benefiting sentient beings, and all suffering, all bad things, come from harming sentient beings. So that means that it's independence on other sentient beings that our own happiness as well as our own suffering come about. Right? I don't know if that's something people normally think about, but it's good to think about. It's in relation to sentient beings that we have happiness or we have suffering. So they're very crucial, they're very important for those experiences. And of course, we don't want suffering. So that then it makes sense that we avoid harming sentient beings. That's the cause of suffering. And we want happiness, and the cause of that is helping, benefiting sentient beings. So that's just like makes so much sense. We can even see in this lifetime, even if we can't see the future and maybe not sure if there is another life after this, but just in this lifetime we can see how we relate to others will affect our own happiness. So then last week I was talking about some things that I was wondering about, like how the way that Lama Tsongkhapa explains this method in this book is different than the way it's explained in other Lamrim books. So I did a little research, and I got a few tips from some of you as well. So Venerable Ngawang has this book called Readings of Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Practice. So it's a collection of essays, I guess, by different scholars, Western scholars, a few Tibetan scholars, talking about Shantideva's and kind of the different aspects of Shantideva's text. And in one of those essays by Roger Jackson, entitled Taming Shantideva, I didn't read the whole thing, but right at the end, because one of the questions I had was, like in here, there's no mention of Tonglen, the practice of Tonglen, which is normally part of this method of exchanging oneself and others. So I wondered, is there any place where Lama Tsongkhapa wrote about Tonglen? So Roger Jackson says, so far as I am aware, Tsongkhapa's writings do not describe this practice of Tonglen, taking and giving. But it was prominent in the writings of the Kadam masters who inspired him. They in turn regarded giving and taking as the key to effectuating Shantideva's ideal of exchanging self and others, even though it is never mentioned in the guide. So I guess Shantideva didn't talk about Tonglen either, right? He didn't mention that particular practice directly, yeah. So Tonglen, the practice of Tonglen, was important to the Kadam masters who did inspire Tsongkhapa, but it's not sure if Tsongkhapa mentions it in any of his writings. You'd think that if it was anywhere, it would be here. It would be in the Lamrim, in this section of exchanging self and others. But then Roger Jackson says that there's this 11-point method for developing bodhicitta, which combines the sevenfold cause and effect, and this one, exchanging self and others. And in the 11-point method, Tonglen is specifically there. In fact, two of the 11 points, 8 and 9, are taking and giving. And it said that this 11-point method came from Lama Tsongkhapa. The story is he got it from Manjushri. So Manjushri gave it to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then Lama Tsongkhapa gave it to his disciples, but more maybe in a restricted way, didn't write about it, but didn't teach it openly, but gave it to his disciples. And there's something called the Ganden ear whispered tradition, which is these secret or not public teaching. So Tonglen is said to come from Lama Tsongkhapa, and it's part of that tradition. And then the first Panchen Lama, Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen, who lived about 200 years after Lama Tsongkhapa, he included it in his text, The Easy Path. Venerable Chödrön taught that, right? So in that text, which is by the first Panchen Lama, you do have Tonglen, although it's not sort of enumerated, how many points there are, but it's mentioned there. And also in the Lama Chupa that we do every 2 weeks, the Guru Puja. Okay, so some of the verses in that last section, going through the graded path, goes through this method of exchanging self and others and Tonglen. So why didn't Lama Tsongkhapa explain it in this book? I don't know. Maybe we have to go into a retreat in a cave and pray to have a vision of Lama Tsongkhapa, and then we can ask him. But I was just reading yesterday or the other day, there's this big book called Mind Training. It's one of those, is it Library of Tibetan Classics? Yeah, Thupten Jinpa translated all these different mind training texts. And in the introduction to that, he says there's a text by Lama Tsongkhapa called Mind Training in Ornamental Words. He didn't give the Tibetan title, and I wasn't able to find any more information. If somebody is really interested, maybe you could try to look that up, find it somewhere. But maybe in that text, there'll be mention of Tonglen. So anyway, that's with regard to whether or not Lama Tsongkhapa taught Tonglen or wrote about Tonglen. So he definitely knew it. He was definitely aware of the mind training practices and Tonglen, and he passed them on to his disciples, but may not have written them in any of his books. Then also in that book of Venerable Ngawang's, there's an essay by Thupten Jinpa, and it's called Bodhicharya Vatara and Mind Training, Tibetan Mind Training. So he's kind of just looking at the influence of Shantideva on the Tibetan mind training or Lojong tradition. And at one point, he compares the exchanging self and others practice in Shantideva's guide and the Tonglen practices in mind training, Tibetan mind training. And he says, although Lojong authors like Chekawa is the one who wrote the 7-point mind training. He's the one who brought it out of the closet and made it public. They explicitly present exchanging self and others on the basis of Tonglen practice. The guide's definition of the exchange seems quite different from the one envisioned in Tonglen. So in the guide, Shantideva, exchanging self and others consists in switching one's identification, self as the other and others as the self, and the shift in attitudes resulting from this. Yeah, so that's like the BBC you gave, trying to unravel that very complex exercise. You actually are switching identity between yourself and others. In contrast, Tonglen's imaginative taking on others' suffering and so forth, and giving to others one's happiness, does not appear to entail the switching of one's personal identity. So you're not actually changing identities with the other person. And then he also says, this is Jimba, the guide defines the exchanging of self and others in terms of changing one's self-identification, viewing others as self and one's self as other. This is not simply a matter of changing one's attitude, but more radically entails renouncing one's self-identity and viewing others as oneself. And in here, in this book, page 211, Lama Tsongkhapa says, he says just the opposite. He says exchanging self and others doesn't mean changing identities. And that's what they say. I've heard that, read that in other Tibetan explanations as well. We're not talking about changing identities, but just changing our attitude. But yeah, so it seems that the guide, and also Jimba says all the known Indian commentaries to Shantideva's guide understand this exchange literally in terms of switching identity, which leads to a swift shift in attitudes towards self and others. And in contrast, to my knowledge, no Tibetan guide commentators interpret the exchange in terms of such a radical switching of identity. Rather, they understand it in terms of an attitudinal shift, renouncing the habitual attitude of cherishing oneself and embracing the attitude of cherishing others. So you're changing your view, your perspectives, and your attitudes, but not changing yourself. So that's interesting that, yeah, Shantideva's guide and the Indian commentaries to it understood it in one way, and then when it got to Tibet, it was understood in another way. So that's one thing I found interesting. And then Jinpa also says that the practice of Tonglen itself seems to be a Tibetan innovation. It's not actually in the Shantideva's guide or other Indian sources, although they take their inspiration from the guide and from other Indian sources, Nagarjuna and even some sutras. So the inspiration comes from them, but the actual practice of Tonglen, where you're actually visualizing, taking the suffering, giving others happiness, doing with the breath and so on. He said this is a Tibetan innovation. And he said it first appeared in the 8 verses of thought transformation. So that's verse number 7, where it talks about taking on the suffering of others. Yeah, so I don't know if this is interesting to you or just scholarly, but yeah, things I hadn't thought about before. Hmm?
Just last night I was reading Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun, and I was in the section of Tonglen, and I thought it was interesting that he talked extensively about really the detailed, elaborate taking, imagining all sorts of taking, and then a lot of giving, but never really mentioning taking the suffering onto destroying the self-centered thought. There wasn't any mention of that part of it, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I had a quick look at some of the earlier mind training texts, and they also talk like that, you just bring it in, and then that, maybe it was later that what the way we're taught, that you imagine this self-cherishing attitude there at your heart, and that gets destroyed by that. So that wasn't part of the earlier mind training text. And then, yeah, you sent me this link to a teaching by Alex Berzin on his website, where he talks about the lineage, and he mentions there are a couple of sutra sources for the practice. One is the Gandhavya Sutra, and another is Vajradvaja's Transference of Positive Potential Sutra. They're both parts of the Avatamsaka Sutra. So the Avatamsaka Sutra is very huge with many chapters. So in that sutra, there's some sources for this practice. But Thubten Jinpa, in his introduction to the mind training book, mentions a few other sutras, like the Akashagarbha Sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra, Akshayamati Sutra, and the Dhammapada, the Tibetan Dhammapada. Those are also considered sources for the mind training. And then, so yeah, they can be traced to sutras, and then also Nagarjuna, Shantideva, and then Atisha received teachings. Jinpa also says even the term mind training, lojong, that seems to be a Tibetan term. That wasn't used in the earlier sources. But Atisha received these teachings from Ser Lingpa and then brought them to Tibet. He first passed them only to one person, Drom Dompa, his closest disciple. And then he passed them to Geshe Potawa. And then he passed them to Geshe Longri Tangpa, who wrote the 8 verses, and Geshe Sharawa. And Geshe Sharawa passed them to Geshe Chekawa. So Geshe Chekawa is the one who wrote the 7-point mind training text. And also Alex says there were 2 lineages of the mind training teachings in Tibet, probably after Geshe Chekawa. One went to Togme Zangpo, who's the author of the 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas, and that is the lineage that's found mainly in the other tradition, Shakya, Nyingma, and Khargyu. And the other lineage eventually went to Lama Tsongkhapa. He received that one, and he passed it to his disciple Nam Kapel, who's the author of this mind training, like the rays of the sun, and then that became the Geluk tradition. So some years ago, I was teaching the 7-point mind training, and I got kind of confused because there were different versions of the text, where the points are in different orders, and some of all those advices and commitments are different. So there are different traditions of that. And apparently the Dalai Lama said, they're all valid. Don't worry about trying to find the right one. This one is right and this one is wrong. They're all valid. They're all equal. And it's just because of, hundreds of years of being passed and maybe little tweaks happening here and there. Like, for example, in the version from that lineage, Togme Zangpo, that's found in the other schools, there's 2 kinds of bodhicitta, ultimate and conventional bodhicitta. So ultimate bodhicitta is explained first. almost at the beginning of the text. That means right away you're jumping into emptiness. And Lama Tsongkhapa rearranged it. Well, maybe it's not sure he's the one who did that, but anyway, in the Geluk version, relative bodhicitta is put first, and ultimate bodhicitta later, because Lama Tsongkhapa feels, like the three principal aspects of the path. First, you generate renunciation, and then bodhicitta, and then emptiness. So he felt that order is better. But it's also valid to start with emptiness, because they do say that some bodhisattvas, the sharp faculty bodhisattvas, do realize emptiness first before bodhicitta, and it actually helps them in their generation of bodhicitta, because they realize, wow, this is the true nature of things, and all these sentient beings are in the dark, they don't know about it, and that's why they're suffering. So yeah, that approach is also helpful. So both are valid. So anyway, just as a conclusion to all of this, so these Lojong teachings, which in the Tibetan tradition include this method of exchanging self and others, can be traced to certain sutras, Mahayana sutras, and also some texts of Nagarjuna and Shantideva. And so they were transmitted in India, and then Atisha received them from Serlingpa, his master in Indonesia, and he brought them to Tibet. And then it seems like the Tibetans got the ball and ran with it. I mean, they just amazing how they developed this practice of Lojong and Tonglen, and yeah, wrote many texts about it. And it didn't just write texts, but they practiced it. I mean, there's just amazing stories. I was reading recently this book called Enlightened Vagabond, which is about Patrul Rinpoche. Patrul Rinpoche is the author of Words of My Perfect Teacher. It's kind of Nyingma Lamrim. He was a Dzogchen master. And this book isn't really a biography. There isn't a biography. It's just a collection of lots of little stories about him that have been passed on orally. And he was quite extraordinary. The one story that really stands out in my mind, he didn't stay in a monastery. He mostly wandered around, and often he just lived out in the open, not even a roof over his head, just in Tibet. It's one thing to do that in Thailand or India, but Tibet in the winter? Anyway, one time, I guess he was staying in a forest with one of his disciples, and he went into the forest. It must have been summertime. There were a lot of horseflies around. He lay down on the ground, took off all his clothes, and just let all these horseflies land on him. And they're pretty vicious, aren't they? They're bloodthirsty. And it says his body was just like black. It was just covered by these horseflies. And he just lay there, not moving, for a couple of hours. And then the next day he said to his disciple, he said, like he was really joyful. He was really, let's go and feed the horseflies again. Wow. When you think about ordinary people, our attitude is, get away from me. And we put all these creams and things to protect ourselves. And yeah, even little mosquitoes, which are probably not as painful as horseflies. But my God, I mean, that kind of... So, yeah, Tibetans are pretty extraordinary. Yeah, so they really developed this tradition of mind training and Tonglen. And then related to Venerable Rinpoche's question last week about attachment coming up when thinking about the kindness of the mother, I saw a quote. It's in Jinpa's essay in that book, and it's a quote from a commentary to Geshe Chekawa's 7-point mind training, and it talks about how just as a lotus grows from mire rather than well-leveled soil, bodhicitta is not born in the hearts of disciples in whom the moisture of attachment has dried up. It grows instead in the hearts of ordinary sentient beings who possess in full all the fetters of bondage. Therefore, in dependence on self-grasping, it is possible to cultivate the awakening mind that exchanges self and others, the uncommon cause for attaining Buddhahood. That's interesting, yeah? So if we completely get rid of all our afflictions and then try to develop bodhicitta, it will be harder. Sounds like. So yeah, having some, and I remember when studying the Ornament for Clear Realizations, that is also mentioned, that bodhisattvas make use of attachment. Hostility, anger, that's like, yeah, we really want to get rid of that because that motivates us to harm others. So that's really totally opposite to bodhicitta. Whereas attachment, many cases, not always, but attachment brings us closer to others. And so then there's more chance of caring for them, having compassion for them. I'm sure, these authors would agree that eventually, of course, we do have to overcome attachment. We have to be free of attachment, because otherwise we can't reach even liberation, much less enlightenment. But on the way, while we're on the way to enlightenment, we can make use of attachment. And then I also remembered when we went to the teachings in Los Angeles, or in Long Beach with Soul Rinpoche recently. He said, I think he all blew our minds. He said something about self-centeredness. He said, it's only through cherishing ourselves that we can learn to cherish others. If we didn't cherish ourselves, we wouldn't be able to cherish others. There would be no reference point. So although the wish for happiness is not the main goal, it's something like the underlying cause of bodhicitta. So that's like, okay, there's one good thing about self-cherishing, because at least we know what it means to cherish, to have this strong concern for one being, even if it's just ourselves. But so then using that, getting in touch with that attitude and saying, oh, that's how I want to feel about others. So that was interesting. Okay, then just one more thing. In Thubten Jimma's essays in that book, he said something about how some masters do not include equalizing self and others in their explanation. They only talk about exchanging self and others, but not equalizing and exchanging. I didn't completely understand what he said, but I noticed that in this book, Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't talk about equalizing self and others. He only talks about exchanging. So in fact, on page 207, the title of chapter 16 isn't really accurate. It says equalizing and exchanging oneself and others, so it should just say exchanging self and others, and that's how it is in the Tibetan. So. He brings in material from Pabonka, from whether he goes into the detail with the, no, maybe he doesn't, the equalizing, yeah. So that's why I wanted to bring in some other material from volume 5. So, yeah. So we've looked at how Lama Tsongkhapa presents it here, and also it's the same in Lamrim Chenmo. He just has those 3 main points. And then other sources, other books have a longer version, a more extended version of this practice. So this is from volume 5, In Praise of Great Compassion. And here he has 6 points Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of the Hand just has the first 5. He doesn't have bodhicitta as a separate point. But the point, the idea is if you meditate on the first 5, you will get bodhicitta. This is a way to generate bodhicitta. And so, yeah, I thought to go through this. You've probably heard it before, but it doesn't hurt to go through it again and again. And yeah, so this starts with equalizing self and others, and then becoming convinced of the disadvantages of self-centeredness. So they're contemplating the self-centered attitude and just really seeing how this brings nothing but problems and suffering, and it's an obstacle to our enlightenment and so on, so that we want to overcome it, not let ourselves continue being led by it. Then 3, understanding the great benefits of cherishing others. We sent out an e-teaching yesterday on the benefits of cherishing others. Then number 4, the actual meaning of exchanging self and others, which is, according to the Tibetan tradition, it means not switching identities, but changing our attitude from self-centeredness to altruism, to cherishing others. Then 5 is Tonglen, taking the suffering of others and giving them happiness. And then bodhicitta. So then the first point, equalizing self and others, this involves contemplating how all living beings, oneself and everybody else, have the same wish to be happy and avoid suffering. This is something natural, spontaneous, inborn. And this isn't the same as the equanimity meditation, which is the prelude to the sevenfold mind training. Sevenfold cause and effect method. So there, the point is to overcome a biased attitude that likes some, has attachment to some, and then aversion, hostility to others. So those kind of attitudes we have where we don't have equal feelings for others. So we're trying to overcome that so we do have equal concern for everybody. So that's the point of the equanimity meditation. Whereas in this case, the emphasis is on recognizing that everyone is basically the same. Everyone is basically like me in wanting to be happy and not suffer. And then this leads us to understand that, yeah, just being focused on me and my happiness and getting rid of my suffering just doesn't make sense. It's everybody else feels that way too. And His Holiness often talks about thinking and even doing a visualization of this, where you visualize yourself, in front of you, you over there, and then on the other side, all other sentient beings. And ask yourself, who's more important? So that makes it really clear, right? Because we always, well, at least in democratic societies, we consider the rule of the majority. What the majority wants is more important than the minority. So I'm the minority, I'm just one, and everybody else is countless. So just thinking in that way, it's like, why am I so focused on just that one person? And so to correct that, then we contemplate that, they all want to be happy and don't want to suffer just like me. And there's also other ways that we're the same, like we all have Buddha nature. I find that really helpful to contemplate. Yeah, the Buddha nature, the potential of the mind is exactly the same. Every single being has that potential to transform their minds, get rid of all their afflictions and all their suffering, all the obscurations, and develop all the excellent qualities and become a Buddha. We all have the potential to be a Buddha. So that's really helpful to think about too. But right now, we're all stuck in samsara. So that's another way that we're all the same. like we're all in the same boat. That was, I don't know, an expression my mother used to say, we're all in the same boat. We all have the same situation, unpleasant situation. And so, why should my suffering be more important than that of others? I also find it helpful to think about, like, for us human beings, at the beginning of our life, we all come out of our mother's womb. We're all born from a mother. And when we're born, we're just so tiny and helpless, totally dependent on others. So just think we all start our life in that way. And then we all end our life, dying and going out of existence. So those are other ways that we are the same. So whatever makes me suffer also makes others suffer. Whatever makes me happy makes others happy. We're just focusing more on the samenesses rather than the differences. So that really helps to bring about a feeling of closeness to others. So yeah, that's one way of doing this meditation, just contemplating, bringing to mind. It's good to do it with individuals. In Jeffrey Hopkins' book, I think it's that one called How to Generate Compassion or something. He talks about his own experience, and I think his first teacher taught him this method. And he used to just sit all night and do it. And he would go back to he'd think back to the beginning of his life and think about people that he knew one by one, his family members, and then kids at school, and and just kind of go from there up to the present, just thinking one person at a time, visualizing that person, and this person wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, just like me. Next one. So I thought, wow, that's pretty extraordinary to do that.
One thing that stayed with me with the way that Jeffrey taught it is that he would say, feel it. Just as I want happiness, now feel that. We put so much emphasis on our feelings. Mm-hmm. And then the other person also wants happiness. Now feel that, because normally we don't feel what another person is going through. That's been helpful to me. Mm-hmm.
So that's one way of doing this meditation on equalizing self and others. And then there's this other more expanded way, which let's see if we can go through. You've probably heard it before, but it's very special. And it seems that it was taught by Trichang Rinpoche, who's the junior tutor of His Holiness. But it's not clear where he got it from. Did he just invent it? But anyway, it's really special. I first heard of it from Khyentse Dhamma Tekchok many years ago, and then apparently the Dalai Lama teaches it as well. So this goes through 9 different points, and they're divided into 3 groups. The first group are they're from the perspective of conventional truth and reasons related to others, thinking in terms of others. So the first is just like what we were just talking about. Everyone equally wants happiness and freedom from suffering. And so is it right to discriminate among them? Is it right to have a discriminating attitude? One person's happiness is more important than others. So that's something to contemplate. I mean, we tend to favor our family, our friends, people on our side of things. We think the way we do, feel the way we do things the way we do. So those are us. And then there's them, the others, people who are farther away, and also different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things, maybe things we don't like, things we don't agree with. So we tend to favor the happiness of some more than others. But is that right? Is that all right, the good way to be? And the second is he says if you had 10 people coming to your door, knocking on your door, and they're all hungry, I guess that happens in some countries. I don't know. It's probably illegal here to go and knock on people's doors and say, I'm hungry, give me something. Even begging on the street, I think in some places it's not legal, right?
It made me think when I was a child. When I was a child, which was a very, very long time ago now, people did come knock on the back door.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And it was just a residential neighborhood in Atlanta. It wasn't any big
Yeah.
thing. So I would be surprised, but then now you probably get shot.
Yeah, anyway, there are people who are hungry and homeless and poor, and somehow let that be known to others, and or sit on the sidewalk with a sign and a cup, saying I'm hungry or whatever. So we know the existence of such people. So if there's 10 of those people, and they're all equally impoverished and hungry and in need, would it be right to give to one and not to another? I was thinking about maybe a more modern day contemporary example. If you were working in a food bank, okay, you're volunteering in a food bank, and that's the whole purpose of a food bank, is to hand out food to people who need it. And so if you're working there in the food bank and you have 10 people walk in the door, all hungry in need of food, would it be right to just say, okay, I like your looks, so I'll give you some food, but I don't like the looks of you, so go away. I mean, that just isn't right. And the third is related to like people who are sick. So if you were a doctor and there were people who are suffering equally, I mean, I guess normally they take care of those who are in urgent need of care. But if they're all, let's say they have the flu, or they're all walking in the door with, runny noses and coughs and fevers, so they all have the same kind of problem. So would it be right to treat only some of those people and not others? You'd lose your license if you did that. But yeah, even not regarding that, but it just doesn't make sense. It isn't right to be choosy about who you're going to help in that situation, because they are all sick, they're all suffering, they're all in need of help and want to be free of their suffering. So these three reasons are with regard to others and their needs, their situation. And then the next three, these are also from the perspective of conventional truth, but they involve reasons related to oneself. So the first one is all sentient beings are kind to us in the past, the present, and the future. So we should help them equally in return. So this is thinking in terms of ourself. I have received kindness from others. So, they've been my mother and father and caretaker and so on, but also our food, our clothes, our medicine, medical care, housing, going to school. Other people built the schools and furnished them with desks and all the materials that we use, the books and other materials to learn and teaching us and so on. So just thinking of all the ways we have benefited from the kindness of others. So just in this life, we could spend hours just thinking about how others have helped us, the different ways they have been kind and helpful to us. So like everything, starting with our body, this body was provided by our parents. We didn't always have this body. We didn't make it ourselves. So it was our mother and father who produced this body, brought it into existence, and then took care of it when we couldn't take care of ourselves. So starting from there, and then all along, right up to the present, and continuing even every day, we are dependent on the kindness of others. So given that, does it make sense to be self-centered and only think about my happiness and getting rid of my suffering and problems? So with in the previous method, the sevenfold cause and effect method, there we meditate on the kindness, but it's mostly about the mother. Mainly focuses on the mother's kindness, and then contemplating, well, everybody has played that role of mother and shown me that kindness. So, so it's kind of more limited, although it's incredible to think about that, but it's just thinking about the kindness of the mother. And it's also just thinking about the past, you know, the kindness I have received in the past. Whereas here, it's thinking about the present, this life, and the future. So in the future as well, I will continue to rely on others for everything, for food and, you know, all the material things, but also for Dharma practice. You know, to be able to practice the Dharma, we need other beings as objects of our practice. Giving, the practice of giving, we need others who are in need to be able to give. If there's nobody out there to give to, we wouldn't be able to cultivate generosity. Ethical conduct, ethics, is basically about not harming others, refraining from harm. So we need others to practice. We could harm them, we could kill them and steal from them and lie from them and so on, but we decide, no, I'm not going to do that. That is wrong. So we need other beings to be able to cultivate and practice ethical conduct. And patience, of course. And there we need difficult people, difficult beings who trigger our anger and our thoughts of doing harmful things so that we can, oh, no, I can't do that. I have to work on cultivating patience. And then, you know, for the Bodhisattva's path, cultivating love, compassion, bodhicitta, and reaching enlightenment, it's impossible without others. Yeah, no way we can get enlightened without other beings. So, you know, from beginningless time all the way up to enlightenment, right? We are dependent on others. And that's the meaning of the kindness of others, past, present, and future. So, it makes sense that we help them, we take care of them. And then the next is, okay, so if somebody says, yeah, but they've also harmed me. Yeah, I've received a lot of harm from sentient beings. They've killed me and tortured me and raped me and beat me and imprisoned me. They've done a lot of harmful things. That's true. It is true. I'm not denying that. Maybe, I mean, in this life I haven't had too much of that, but, you know, in past lives we've definitely been harmed by others. So the answer to that is, if we compare the harm we've received from others and the kindness we've received from others, the kindness outweighs the harm. There's much more kindness than harm. So hopefully that's the case in this lifetime. If you think about your experiences in this life, how many times you've been harmed by somebody compared with how many times you've been helped, and there's probably a lot more kindness and help from others. So I like to think that most of the interactions between people, just this planet, 8 billion people, you know, just thinking about what people are doing during the day, how they're spending their time, how they're behaving, I really think most of the time people are taking care of each other. They're not harming each other. There are incidents, of course, of murder and violence and nasty things happening, but I think those are the exception rather than the norm. Those are rare compared to, if you just think of families, people taking care of each other and their family, cooking for each other, washing their dishes together, going out together, being kind to each other. At least not harming. Even if, like, people traveling on a bus or a train, they may not be kind to each other, but at least they're not harming each other. They're leaving each other alone. You could kill the person next to you on the bus, but you don't. We don't harm each other. It's actually rare for that to happen. So yeah, so I think there's a lot more kind and compassionate and at least non-harmful behaviors among sentient beings than there is harm. And then 6 is to consider how we are all impermanent, going through changes, getting older, having to die. We're all gonna die one day. Given that, there's no point in discriminating against others or holding grudges. So I think a helpful way to think about this would be to imagine if you're on a plane, you're on an airplane with a bunch of other people, and suddenly you run into turbulence. Yeah, that's always kind of scary. Plane is, you're not sure if it's going to land okay or if it's going to crash. So everyone's probably feeling kind of nervous. So in that situation, are you going to start picking fights with people around you on the plane? You're like, get your elbow off my armrest. Pick up that napkin you dropped on the floor. I think it's not very likely, right? Because we just have this feeling we're all gonna die, we're all gonna crash. And that situation, I think, tends to engender feelings of closeness and care rather than hostility and doing harmful things. And this is even more important, like thinking about what kind of state of mind do we want to have when we're dying? Do we want to be angry and hostile and nasty? Is that a good state of mind to have? I mean, some people can't control their minds, and maybe if they have a strong tendency to get angry, they will get angry in that situation, be selfish. But I tend to think, again, that's probably rare. That's probably the exception. And most people would, after the initial scare, they'd probably do something to calm their mind down and be in a good state of mind and be caring towards their fellow passengers rather than nasty to them. So, okay, well, we don't have time to go through the last 3. We'll do that next week. But yeah, these are really juicy, juicy points to contemplate. Any questions before we end today?
It's a personal comment in the past month or so since working with the Buddha Hall on furnishing it with Venerable Nawang and Pema. It's just been absolutely correct in what you're saying, is that meeting strangers, even particularly, people don't generally meet monastics. We went to somebody's house just on the South Hill. The kindness is unbelievable. And to see that being kind produces almost immediate results in that response from others, and then of course being members of the Sangha, trying to think that it's about, may these robes bring a beneficial imprint on the minds of those that we meet, and part of what we present as ourselves leaves that lasting imprint. But it's been a joy. It's been an absolute joy doing this in the middle of Christmas shopping or whatever we ended up doing. Is the kindness of others is just, it's there. I rarely see when they're not even interacting with us. Being kind to each other is a common witnessing experience.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I tend to think like Christianity has had a really big influence on Western culture, Western civilization, and the values of kindness and generosity and so on. I've had not vast experience with other cultures, but you could find other cultures where it isn't so normal to be kind and helpful to others. But yeah, depends a lot on religious ideas, philosophical ideas, cultural ideas, and so on, how we're taught, what we're taught. So Jesus had a huge impact. Oh, definitely. Yeah, he was pretty amazing. If somebody hits you, turn the other cheek. Dying on the cross to save all people. Yeah, I remember going to in Israel, the place where Gethsemane, is that it's called? The place where he was crucified. They have a church there, and just thinking, now I understand what that was all about. I mean, these teachings, taking on the suffering of others, going through difficult experiences for the benefit of others. It never made sense to me before how being crucified is going to help anybody else. But thinking about it in terms, sorry, thinking about it in terms of Tonglen, the practice of Tonglen. And of course it has inspired, I shouldn't say that, it has inspired huge numbers of people to follow his example, follow his teachings, and be good and help others. So definitely has had great benefit. But yeah. Okay, so let's dedicate, offer a mandala and then dedicate the merit.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.